Hello, you are listening to an archived worship service of First Presbyterian Church, Columbus, Mississippi. Thank you for listening.
When we read Scripture, it is never simply an academic endeavor. And that's a really difficult thing to wrap your mind around if you happen to find yourself one day in seminary where you're in school and you're learning like you've always learned in an academic way. But those are the words that I was greeted with as I walked into my first Old Testament survey class. When we read Scripture, it is never simply an academic endeavor. Many years ago, I was taught, probably by some wonderful Sunday school teacher, to always look for myself in the Bible story. This isn't a hard thing to do. In fact, I found it quite easy many times. It wasn't hard because when I read Scripture, I would always find myself interacting with it. Was I Samuel or Mary who could say, "Here I am, Lord, send me"? Was I Abram and Sarai, trusting in the mysterious ways of God and setting out on a journey? Was I Mary or Martha, thinking or doing? Or was I the priest or the Samaritan or the man lying half dead in the ditch? See, you get my point. You understand what I'm saying when I say that when you read Scripture, it's not about merely an academic endeavor. You are always finding a place in the words of Scripture. I think you get my point. It's by the gift of the Spirit and by our connection in faith, the Bible stories tell us about who we are, or better yet, who we might be. David Lose is the president of Luther Seminary in Philadelphia, and he assures me that I'm not alone when I remember the teachings of my Sunday school teacher so long ago. He says we all do this. We all read Scripture searching for ourselves. He says because of that, the Beatitudes pose us modern Christians a simple and subtle trap. If we go to the Beatitudes searching for ourselves, we will start to believe that Jesus is setting up some kind of term and condition of blessing rather than blessing itself. It creates a strange paradox, Lose says, where I am eager to mourn, I'm eager to suffer in order to gain blessing. That's a strange paradox. But if that's the terms and conditions for blessing, if that's what we've been molded to think, then the Beatitudes subtly start to creep in with a little bit of anxiety. He also contends that when the Beatitudes are used as condition of blessings, we are sometimes less concerned with God blessing than with God blessing us. His great conclusion is that God sets up no condition. That we need to rethink the way that we read Scripture. He says he sets up no condition, but rather is just plain blessing people. All kinds of people. Down and out people, extremely vulnerable people, people at the bottom of the ladder. Because for God to show up with mercy and bless those who we'd least expect, the poor rather than the rich, the mourning rather than the celebrating, the meek and the peaceful rather than the strong and the victorious, if God will show up in places like that, then God will show up everywhere, showering blessings. And I like where he's going. He is saying the terms and conditions are as is. Rich or poor, it doesn't matter. Strong or weak, it doesn't matter. Victorious or powerful, it doesn't matter. God's blessings are showered out upon the people. I think there's something very alluring to that, and I believe there's something very true about his statement, but it leaves something out. It feels a bit distant to me. I believe there is a simple and subtle trap in the Beatitudes, but I also believe my Sunday school teacher. I am in there, but where? First, I start with the idea that Jesus is not talking about the afterlife here. That's how it's been interpreted for too many generations. Jesus is not talking about heaven. Jesus is not talking about delayed blessings, like once you die, everything will be okay. That's not what Jesus has in mind. And we know that from the verb tense that is used throughout, and the fact that the rest of the Sermon on the Mount tells us very plainly that God is blessing now. It is here. It's not some pie in the sky reward for being beaten up all of your life. There is blessing immediately in the hearing of Jesus Christ. That's where I start. And since I believe that, there is one place, one subtle, one simple place that avoids the narcissistic garbage of a me-first world, but allows me to also search for myself in the text. It is quite simple, really. I am part of what blesses. And so are you. Who among us can say that blessings have not covered and surrounded us? That doesn't mean that we don't have times where we mourn, or seasons where we have been meek, but we have already received gifts upon gifts of grace and mercy, so many that we cannot count. What a blessing it is. My blessing then must be to become more than one who is just fine and secure sitting on top of my hilltop with my blessings. I must become more and share freely, give myself just as I have freely received. And so the trap is allowing ourselves to believe just for 1 minute that our blessing is, first, not enough for the journey, and second, ours alone. David Lose is correct. There is always a trap. It is simple and it's subtle. The trap of that kind of thinking is to watch blessings sour to a curse. Blessings that leave us feeling insecure or fearful, making us always bitter at someone else's blessings, or never becoming gratitude. The trap of the Beatitudes is to long for a cup of water while standing next to a faucet. But if you find yourself the blessing, Christ promises, your cup runneth over. And so here we are. A people blessed to be a blessing. Find ourselves not caught in the trap of a me first attitude toward God, but actually acknowledging the blessings that we have in our lives and understanding ourselves in the passage that we can be part of the solution. When those who mourn, when those who are mistreated, when those who have been treated unjustly, we are part of the blessing. A people that do not live in fear or insecurity, a people that cannot wait to make creation better, a people who must act to create peace, a people who must comfort the afflicted, a people who must receive the meek as our very own family, a people who must fill the cup of justice, a people who must nurture the pure heart, a people who must display mercy, especially to those who have been persecuted. Jesus assures us that even when we do, it will deliver us into places of conflict or even hate. Living out God's blessing is not easy, as we have said so many times. In fact, it might tear you apart. And in that, we will still receive God's blessing. I found a part of our confession especially helpful as I read this section of Scripture. I consider what it is to be a blessing today. These words come from the Confession of 1967. It is the first uniquely Presbyterian confession found in our Book of Confessions. These words were written 50 years ago. The members of the church, that's me and you, the members of the church are emissaries of peace and seek the good of all in cooperation with powers and authorities in politics, culture, and economics. But they have to fight. They have to fight against pretensions and injustice when these same powers endanger human welfare. Their strength is in their confidence that God's purpose, rather than human schemes, will finally prevail. Did you hear yourself in those words? Those words may be 50 years old. That may have been when they were written down, but they embody a tradition of over 500 years in our Reformed tradition that have come down to us through the generations of faith. Or as interpreted this past week by our stated clerk, J. Herbert Nelson wrote these words: "As the top ecclesial officer of the nation's largest reform body, I urge the President and his administration to reverse this harmful decision regarding refugees. Presbyterians are not afraid. Presbyterians are not afraid of this so-called terror threat. We are not afraid because we profess a faith in Jesus, who entered this world a refugee himself. Presbyterians choose welcome, and we have chosen welcome. During World War II, when we demanded the U.S. allow Jewish refugees, when we demanded Korean refugees, when we demanded Vietnamese refugees, and with every choice of welcome, we enter into relationship with people who become neighbors, friends, and family. No administration can convince us to fear. As a minister, I often wonder what I would have preached had I been in this very pulpit in 1862. I often wonder what I would have preached if I was in this pulpit in the 1930s. I often wonder what I would have preached standing here before you in the 1960s. I like to think that I would have claimed boldly before the people of God an unpopular notion of love, of human dignity, of hopeful futures, of blessing rather than fear. Well, here we are. I don't have to wonder about 1862. I don't have to worry about the 1930s. I don't have to worry about the 1960s, because here we are. In history, we'll ask, what did the church say? With what terms and conditions did the church place on blessing? We are there. In the Beatitudes, we're there taking seriously our blessings. Are there, and now we must be here. Taking what Jesus said seriously, and it's not easy. It's not a simple platitude. It's not simply beautiful poetry. The Beatitudes ask something of us. Nope. The Beatitudes demand something of us. It is a revolutionary calling to be a blessing. To be part of a love that can turn the world upside down, even when we're the most afraid. We're there. And now we must be here. God bless you in the hearing and the being of these Beatitudes. Amen.